Hi everyone, so today we're going to be looking at disc brakes. Primarily that is the removal, inspection and reinstallation of your disc pads. So this is super important and should be part of your maintenance inspection regime on your bike. I can't stress that enough. Disc pads wear a lot quicker than they would normally on a rim brake bike, for example. So pads on a rim brake bike may last you maybe a couple of years. Pads on a disc brake bike could maybe last you 6 months at a maximum. So something you really need to look at and take care of, and it can also be a source of some infernal squealing if you get contamination in there. So yeah, very important and super easy to do. So all we need for this really is very simple tools. So you need a small screwdriver, flathead screwdriver, and then also what I've purchased, and if you've got disc brakes, I think it is well worth buying the specific tool for it, which is a pad spreader, something along the lines of that. There's numerous makes out there that do it. This you just slide into the pad and open it wide to spread the pad, as the name suggests. You can use other things. I've seen use knives and things, but that can damage your pad. So one good option or an alternative to this, if you want, is a plastic tyre lever. I've used that many a times in the past when I've been stuck. So a tyre lever does not as good a job, but you can certainly do it with that. But if you've got a disc brake bike, it's well worth investing in a pad spreader, because you are going to be, or should be, doing this quite often. So with the wheel off, I'll just give you, as always, a very brief overview of the hydraulic braking system that we've got in front of us. This is a Shimano Ultegra one, but the hydraulic system's principle is the same on all bikes. So what you've got a brake lever at the top, which has a hydraulic reservoir of brake fluid in there. As you press your brake lever or pull your brake lever, what you're doing is you're squeezing the hydraulic fluid through the tubing down into your caliper. Within your caliper on either side you've got a piston. So as you squeeze the lever and you squeeze the fluid through the caliper, what that does, that pushes the two pistons closer together. On the inside of each piston, that's where your brake pads sit. So essentially, as your pistons closer together, so do your pads, which clamp onto your brake rotor, braking the bike. As you release the lever, the fluid is released and it pushes back. That's as simple as it is. So first things first, before we remove the pads, what we do is we use our pad spreader. We just pop that in there, and you can see that's just spreading the pads nice and wide. So what that's doing, that's pushing the pistons back. So that's resetting them back to their position. Because if you needed to replace the pads are a lot thicker. So if you was just to remove the pads as you were now and pop new pads in, you wouldn't be able to get your rotor in because the pad will be too thick. So it's very important. That's the first point of call. So you use your pad spreader, easy for me to say, and just push the caliper, the pistons back out into their normal first position, and then we can then remove the pads, and if we do need to replace them, we can pop some new ones in. Next stage. As you can see here, we've got the retaining clip which holds the pads in place. On the other side, if you can see just there, you've got a little clip. So we just remove that clip and set that to one side. Remove the screw. These aren't tight, they're just, it's more of just a securing to make sure the pad is located in the correct position. So take that out, and then it's as simple as this: 2 fingers and pull the pads out. Let's move that out of the way a little bit now. So as you can see here, what you've got is a piston, and what that does is it will squeeze those two together and your rotor would be in the middle of there. So those are your pads. So you just pull those apart, and what you've got a little spring that sits in between the two pads. And what that does is, as the pads close, it forces them back out again. Okay, set that to one side, and then we can have a look at the pads. Okay, so we've got the pads off now. This is a point where you can just inspect the pads to make sure that you've got plenty of thickness still on them. If they're getting quite worn down, then you need to be replacing them immediately. You don't want to pop them back in and wait till it's down to the metal. That'll damage it. So what you need to do, is just inspect them and do it on a regular basis, because you'll be surprised how quickly these do wear down. So I just have a look at those, and they're about halfway through their lifespan. There's no contamination on the pads, so happy with those. So I'll just wipe those down, just get rid of the braking dust on there and pop them to one side. Good opportunity now is just to clear up all the caliper, because as you can see, this will be full of brake dust as well. Very simple, just a cloth or a brush if you've got one. I'm just going to use a cloth at this point, and just wipe it down. Just get rid of all the muck in there, because you do get a lot of brake dust in there, and quite often that can result in you getting a sticky caliper, which means it doesn't return, and that could be a form of getting your brake pads at rub. So I just give that a nice little clean in there. That's got rid of all of that. Now, looking in there, and all the pads, as you can see, I don't know if you can see in the piston down there. So we're happy the pads are clean, there's no contamination on them, and there is life still in the pads, so there's still a thickness on there, so you're happy that they can go on. If you're in doubt and you're getting really down to the bottom of the pad, then you need to be replacing them immediately. So these, we're happy for these to go back in, no contamination on. The caliper has now been cleaned. One of the first steps was that we pushed the pistons back, so we're okay with that. These are ready to go back in. Quite often on the pads there'll be a left and a right actually on the pad. So there is on here, so that's right on the bike. So there we go. Pop that in, and then it's a case of just sliding those back into place, like so. Once we've got the pads in place, what I just use a fine little Allen key and just pop that through. Just give it a wiggle. All that does, that just centers the screw for you to get this through. So in it goes. So that fits in nice and easy now, and then it's just a case of just screw that up. Not too tight, remember, it doesn't need to be tight. And then remembering the little clip on the other side, we just pop that back in, and in it goes. There we go. So that's your pads removed, inspected and refitted. The other point now to consider will be your rotor. Once you've done that and you're happy that you've still got life in your rotor, you need to ensure that it's clean. You don't want to be putting your fingers on it really, because the grease from your fingers can transfer to squealing on the bike. So quite often the number one source of brake squeal on disc brakes is because of contamination either in your pads or on your rotor. So while it's off, you may as well give it a clean, so you can get a variety of disc cleaners, brake disc cleaners, and you just spray them on, let it evaporate, or spray it on and then just wipe it off with a clean cloth. Very important, and every time I take a wheel off, a disc brake wheel off, I would definitely clean the rotor. Super important, and it just stops your brake from squealing, which I hate squeals, as we all know. Once you're happy with the rotor is clean, pop it back on the bike and you're good to go. So last thing, and is probably one of the most important parts of this for your safety, is once you've put your wheel back onto your bike, it is super important before you ride it that you pump the brake and start to get the brake. Because what you've done, if you can remember, if you've only replaced the pads i.e. you've put the ones that you've taken off the bike back on, you've pushed those pistons back into their original position, and the pads will have worn, so there'll be a big gap between your rotor and your pads. So what you need to do is pump the brakes, and what that does is it closes up the gap as they self-adjust, because on hydraulic and disc brakes they do self-adjust, and they will just self-adjust up to the correct point, and then you're good to go. But it's super important, because if you don't do that, you won't have any brakes. So super important, before you jump on the bike, get the wheel back on and pump the brake. I can't stress that enough, okay? And there we go.